I am Michele Leclaire, Exhibition Director at Buckham Gallery. Today, I am joined by Lauren Scavo-Fulk, an artist whose work we are currently showing at Buckham. Lauren's landscape drawings will be on view in the gallery with dear memory through October 3rd. We are also hosting an online viewing room on our website. Before we begin, I would like to thank the individuals and organizations who support Buckham Gallery, including Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, and the National Endowment for the Arts. The Greater Flint Arts Council Share Art Genesee Grant Program, made possible by the Genesee County Arts Education and Cultural Enrichment Millage Funds, your tax dollars at work. All right, so an introduction. Lauren Scavo-Fulk lives and works in the Pittsburgh area of Pennsylvania. She earned her MFA in drawing from Indiana University of Pennsylvania and a BA in drawing, painting, and English from Grace College in Indiana. Lauren's charcoal drawings focus on landscapes as universal and personal experiences intertwined in both individuals' lives and cultural histories. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I'm so glad you're able to do this. With us having to cancel our events and everything with the pandemic, it's been kind of a nice addition to programming to be able to host you. And with you being in Pennsylvania, this is a nice way to do it.
Yeah, this is a great option for being so far out of state.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with landscape. Can you tell me more about your background and what draws you to landscape?
Yeah, I didn't do my first landscape painting until I was, I think, a junior in college, in undergrad. And I'd always kind of avoided it because I associated it with like Thomas Kincaid and Bob Ross and that kind of thing, where it's very kind of romanticized and doesn't have a whole lot of content that I could readily see in it. But I think that was just because I hadn't really studied it before. And it does have such a rich history. So I really started getting serious about landscape when I was in graduate school. It was something that I became interested in very late in undergrad. I had only done a couple of landscape paintings before graduation, but it was what I decided to focus on in grad school. And what interested me in it was how tied together landscape is with personal experience. It's kind of a bystander for everything that happens, and we all associate experiences and emotions with different locations, whether consciously or not. And I find it very interesting that no two people, no matter how similar their histories are, have the exact same experience with any given location. Mm-hmm. It's a very personal thing, but it's also cultural. I think there can be more collective experiences associated with locations. So yeah, it's mostly that connection between human experience and physical location that is really interesting to me. And I think it's something that there's really no, like, you can't really get to the bottom of it. It's something that you can just keep exploring and finding more and more.
So what draws you to a certain landscape or experience of place?
I'm typically drawn toward more ordinary and commonplace locations that we would ordinarily kind of pass over. When I always work from photographs, and I generally try not to go out looking specifically for certain types of locations. I just I work from my cell phone camera, and it's something that I have on me all the time. So I just kind of try to keep an eye out in my daily life for places that look visually interesting to me in some way. And I just kind of stockpile photos as I go throughout my life, and then I just have those whenever I'm ready to start a new piece. So my work is influenced by some ideas in environmental psychology, and one of those is that is the idea that when you become familiar with a place, you stop noticing things about it. Your brain kind of filters that out because it frees up space in your brain to process other things, and so there's benefits to that because you don't have to be constantly locating yourself or thinking about things related to your location. But the minus of that is that there's a lot that you miss out on because you don't notice your environment, essentially. And so I tend to draw locations that I frequent. Like I had a series of drawings of one particular part of the parking lot that I parked in every day in grad school, because it was a place that I looked at every day. But it wasn't really until I was thinking intentionally about location and landscape that I really started noticing it and noticing all of the small little pockets of detail that are really beautiful, but that I hadn't intentionally noticed before and would otherwise overlook. So that tends to be what I'm drawn toward.
Nice. When I experience your drawings in the gallery, I am struck by the scale. So these intimate photograph-like rectangles centered in the middle of the large expanse of white paper. I'm most drawn to the pieces like these here that break that rectangle, the hard boundaries in such as parking lot and power lines, and then the New Kensington. How do you choose your scale, and when you decide to break that rectangle?
All of the work that I've done for this body of work is the same basic scale. They're all on 18 by 18 inch paper, and then the internal drawings are usually somewhere around 5 by 7 inches. So they're all very small, and I tried a few different scales, and I found that the 5 by 7 size was it was small enough that it felt like it created a sense of intimacy with the viewer. Any smaller than 5 by 7 and it's difficult to get the same level of detail that I was able to get from that size. So a lot of it is I want the viewer to have a very personal and intimate experience with the landscape that I'm representing. And I like that this size, they kind of have to step closer to it and get a good look at it to really see the content of it.
Oh, definitely. You have to walk up to the pieces and be drawn into them and have that sort of experience. So you're not necessarily referencing the photograph though as like this snapshot in time. It was more just that it's the intimacy that size brings into play then. And then the second half of that question was how do you when do you decide to break sort of the rectangle?
That took a little bit of trial and error. You okay? It took a little bit of trial and error to figure out exactly what type of reference kind of lent itself to that. But I found that it's kind of it's more based on the composition of the photo that I'm working from. I kind of have to work with the movement of the photograph, if that makes sense. And usually it's just a matter of like, are there any obvious are there any obvious like tree branches or power lines or things like that that are sticking out in a kind of way that lends itself to that. I tried to force it before, and it looked kind of disjointed and unintentional.
Yeah, well, certain things definitely lend themselves to it. The lines, power lines, trailing off, and become more concrete in the middle, and then just kind of trailing off to the side. So it works very well. It's great.
And one of the reasons that I started doing that was I work from photographs, and I'm also the content of my work is influenced by kind of that contrast between photography and drawing. My work talks a lot about the contrast between subjectivity and objectivity. So the way that things actually exist in the real world and how that is different from the way that we perceive them through our emotions and our experience. And I think that that's reflected in the relationship between photography and drawing, because even though photography is subjective, it's often considered more objective than drawing. Drawing is seen as one of the more direct ways of creating art, because you can't really disguise your marks when they're made directly on the paper. And so one of the reasons that I started breaking the border was to kind of further emphasize that separation between photography and drawing, and to have my drawings do something that a photograph can't do, and to kind of highlight that.
Oh, definitely. Do you use multiple photographs for a single drawing, or is this, or a single captured moment?
It depends on the piece, but most of them it's a single photograph. I often invent a little bit when I draw from the photograph, and I guess more often than invent, I cut a lot out. I usually end up simplifying things, partly because of the scale, but then also because I think my work often is more effective when it's more minimal, I think. Yeah. Is that what you think?
Well, that plays into something I was going to ask at it. So your work was chosen for the Dear Memories show because I felt a certain nostalgia, a flash of memory, or even an idealized experience of place when looking at the works. And so that was sort of like the simplifying of your image, the photographs. And the monochromatic drawings are beautifully rendered, and the landscapes are shown at their best, even overturned garbage can and the expressway bridges. Are you sharing in a subjective experience with the viewers? Is this a special way in which you want them to view these places?
Yeah. What I am trying to achieve in my work is kind of a balance between, I'm very influenced by both romanticism, which I think most landscape artists are in some way influenced by romanticism, because that was when it was popularized, and it's just a huge part of the history of it. But I'm also influenced by deadpan photography, which is a style of photography where the artist tries to present things as objectively as possible and kind of removing themselves emotionally from the work. And in my work, I draw influence from both of those, and I kind of try to meet them in the middle. So I'm influenced by both of those genres, and I kind of try to meet them in the middle, because I think that's more it's more true to the way that we really experience things, instead of one of those two extremes. And one of the ways that I want that to play out in my work is that as the artist, I think it's impossible for me to completely separate myself emotionally from the work. I think a lot of my own subjective experiences come through in the way that I present things, which I think is pretty clear from the fact that the tone of all the pieces is pretty uniform.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I try to achieve at least some sort of feeling of objectivity in them, because I want my viewers to also have their own experience with it. So I'm interested in that kind of interplay between my expressed emotions in the work and my viewers' emotions as they engage with it. So yeah, I try to find that kind of middle zone where my emotions are present, but they're not so present that they overtake the viewers.
Yeah, one of the things I thought was interesting when sort of how I got the nostalgia feel for them was that they're very, in all the landscapes, very cleaned up, like presentations,
Mm-hmm.
like seen at their best. You have, you know, whether it's the forests and streams or the, you know, like the overgrown bridge and the highway, the overpass. There's no which have evidence of man, you know, power lines and of human culture. There isn't graffiti, there isn't the litter. It's sort of it's showing it in its best, you know.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason for that is that I think that there's a lot of beauty in those types of places. So even though I am kind of cleaning them up, it's kind of to try to highlight those places and show that there is beauty in them, even if it's something that isn't obvious when we first look at it.
What draws you to one landscape moment or ripple over another?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. It's a lot of it is kind of subconscious, I guess. As I mentioned, I kind of stockpile photos that I just take in my daily life. And usually I do those without really thinking about it. Like I'll see a place and I'll think, oh, that looks kind of cool. And I'll take a photo of it and then maybe not even think about it for a few months. And then when I'm ready to start a new work, I'll go back through all of those photos and try to find one that stands out to me kind of in hindsight. And so I usually, the locations themselves, I guess, are usually a little bit less important than the composition of the photo, or if there's a particular area of land that is visually interesting. Yeah, I think it's more of a visual decision than dependent on location. I think maybe partly because I don't intentionally seek out locations for photos. So all of the places that I have photos of are pretty familiar to me already, because they're places that I go to fairly often just throughout the course of life.
So each landscape is already a known entity, but in the capture, in the process of photographing and taking moments, then you go back and there's a spark, something that draws you in.
Yeah, definitely.
So what are you doing now? What's next with your work?
Right now, I'm usually, when I make changes in my work, they're kind of small changes that happen over the course of a long period of time. So sometimes it's hard for me to track those changes except in hindsight. But right now, I have pretty limited studio time because I'm a newish mother. I have an 11-month-old, as you might have noticed, and he takes decent naps. I do most of my work during his naps, so I can usually get maybe an hour or two a day. So because of that, most of my art practice right now has just been kind of making work without really focusing on the research side of things. I've just been trying to get into the studio and get done whatever I can. So there hasn't been a whole lot of changes on the content end of things, but I have been doing some experimenting with different media and different scales of work, just to kind of have a different perspective on the same content. I've been working a lot more with oil painting, because color just adds a whole different dimension, and it even the slightest the slightest addition of color changes things dramatically. So I've been doing a little bit with that. So yeah, it's just been kind of very small experimentation. So.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for talking with me today. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate Theo's contribution. I really appreciate you taking time today.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you.